on what's the difference between the coercive dynamic or circle and the collaborative dynamic or circle. So the coercive is what we're used to, which is where I usually end up starting. It's the water we're swimming around in without often thinking about it or getting a sense of what it is. It's a culture which is run on standards that are put in place by some authority external to us, who's come up with rules and laws about how things should be and how we ought to behave. And these are backed up by coercion, and it might be emotional coercion, it might be physical coercion, and obviously the ultimate is the force of weapons, whether it's with the state or with those who would like to act in place of the state, the mafia, for instance. So it runs all the way from the household that you grew up in and the power structure, who's got the power, who enforces what happens, right up to the largest systems that we're part of. And they all run on this coercive dynamic, which engenders fear. And fear is the emotional energy that drives the coercive circle. So the third piece that makes the coercive circle run on a personal level is the installing of the guilt button. That each of us has learned how to be guilty and how to blame ourselves and other people for what's wrong or what isn't right in any situation, and to respond to praise about doing the right thing and punishment for doing the wrong thing. And it starts as early as our first words: good boy, bad girl. And the interesting thing about it is that it doesn't really matter what the content is, and that will change in different contexts. I remember discovering that a Lebanese girlfriend felt guilty about her family and about totally different things than I did. But what we had in common was that we were both acting out of guilt as we thought about how we wanted to relate to our families. So if we move to the collaborative circle, there are some simple principles, 3 simple principles that change that coercive dynamic of fear into one of synergic collaboration, where in fact you start to get more of what you want than you even thought was possible. In the coercive, you get less of what you want and you get an awful lot of what you don't want, and that turns it into a vicious circle which keeps biting your backside the more you try to accomplish things. With the collaborative circle, these few simple principles, which we're not very used to, will actually create a dynamic where, in fact, you not only get what you want, you get more than that, and discover that there's more that you wanted that you hadn't even thought about. So the 3 simple principles are that instead of being judgers of right and wrong as our fundamental filter, we are creative, adaptive learners who are continually exploring and finding our way through whatever situation we find ourselves in. So it seems that by nature, by birth, we are part of the living system that is curious, explorative, and open to learning our way through the world, as the other mammals around us are. But even more so, the primates, of which we're a member, are particularly explorative, curious, and playful in their way of relating in the world. So if we're complex, adaptive learners and explorers, what we need is the second principle. We need a sense of trust of ourselves in the world, trust of our process, trust of the environment around us, and of our ability to navigate this world. And that's built initially through our first encounters with our human society, with our parents, with our nurturers, who have to provide at least a 2-year window of total trust where we can't get along in the world without them holding the space for us. And the third principle that makes the collaborative work is a really deeply felt system of how interconnected we are and the world is, our total interdependence. And you might think of that in our current terms as being systems thinkers, which is the kind of academic approach to what we really need to have embodied in the whole way that we feel ourselves through the world. The filter of seeing everything as an ecology, a complex ecology of which we're one node in a web. So one of the key questions that keeps coming up in everything that we do is, what do you want? What do you want? What do you value? What do you need? And this hooks into the collaborative system as part of the complex learner, adaptive learner. You're not going to learn unless you know what it is that you want to learn and why you're learning it. However, in the way that we've grown up, in largely the coercive dynamic, thinking about what you want is seen as selfish. So there's a huge retraining process of ourselves to actually start to find out at any moment, what is it that we want? Because it turns out that knowing what we want and value and acting toward it in a creative way is the way of navigating the world that will get us collaborative dynamic. And that's a huge learning curve for most of us. So if we're not primarily judgers, praisers, and blamers, but in fact creative learners, the image that's close that we actually know from experience is that we're like artists with our lives, that we're in a continual process, if we choose to see ourselves that way, of creating what we want around us. And it feels like we can learn a tremendous amount from the artistic process about how to encourage that creativity in ourselves and in our communities. Because right now, that creativity is pretty stifled by rules, laws, judgments of one another, judgments of what ought to be rather than what can be. And so in being an artist, you first have to have a medium that you know. So just to give you a feel for examples of what I'm talking about, one of the mediums that I'm working in with other people is the household. The household as an ecology, the household as a living work of art that's giving us the experience that we want to have. So we're creating together an experience by looking at our lives, and in particular the household that we're sharing, as an ecology, an interconnected, interdependent experience that we have the power to shape in order to get what we want. And so the first place we start is asking, what is it that we actually want? And that turns out often to be a hard question, because it's covered up with all of those defenses that we have in protecting ourselves and thinking about what should be and what other people should be doing. That makes it really hard to get to the core of that question. What do I actually want? What is the current situation? If I look at it, how is it? Without blaming, without judgment, what's actually going on here? And how do we hold the creative tension between what is and where we want to be, where I want to be, and make that part of a work of art getting there.